And going back to the iHousing process, would GW housing programs ever consider an assignment system that's based on quality points? This is a question I received a lot. That would award assignments based on, let's say, academic or extracurricular achievement or merit-based achievements.
Well, it's a question we get every year, and my response is, at this point, we are not looking at that type of a system. But I think if our students were to say that's the type of system that they overwhelmingly wanted, we would go to that. But here's the issue with some of those systems. You have somebody who gets a 4.0. Should they get the first housing assignment because they got a 4.0? Or you have somebody who is very involved but gets a 2.5. Where does it become fair in the overall grand scheme of things? That person who gets a 4.0 may not have as many quality points because they're not involved in as much. And so the reason why we frankly do a random system by class and don't take any of that into consideration is because we believe that that is the most fair system to the overall population. There are going to be people who are never going to get a 4.0. They don't want to get a 4.0, they don't desire to get a 4.0, and so why am I going to hold that against them? On the same hand, there are plenty of people that have one bad semester. That's going to affect your GPA for your entire 4 years. Am I going to hold that against you and continue to hold that against you, for the rest of your college career? That's not necessarily fair to do, and so that's why we don't look at a system that's based on that.
Sure. Although if you distributed the merit points, so to speak, on both of the bases, do you think it could be possible to outweigh?
I think if you came up with some system that took a lot of things into consideration, could you come up with a system that would work? Sure. Administratively, it would be very difficult to manage with a population of over 7,000 on-campus residents, right? Because, a lot of those systems work for much smaller institutions. For larger institutions, things like that, they tend not to work as well because who's going to track all of that stuff?
Right. I guess that would be up to the system, but like you said, it depends on the good design. And, speaking about the notion of fairness, the iHousing website basically says that 80% of iHousing applicants are satisfied with their results.
83% of the population got their first, second, or third preference.
Right, and I'm just wondering if it's feasible, really, to create a system, or if there is a system that would exist that would satisfy a higher number. Maybe not 100%, because I realize that's obviously not realistic. But more than 83, maybe. Yes,
there would be a system that you could create if your inventory were different. GW's inventory doesn't allow for, frankly, a better system, and I'll tell you why. First of all, 75% of your rising second years are going to have kitchens, which means 25% are not. Overwhelmingly, students want kitchens as rising second years, but there's gonna be that population that's not going to get them based on what the inventory is that we have. And so because of that, the only way that you could create a system where students would get essentially what they want is if you had a housing inventory that was the same across the board. So whether it's I had 7,400 beds in Ivory Tower or 7,400 beds in Potomac House. But as long as you have 50 different properties with, hundreds of different room types, you can't create a system where everybody's going to get what they want because, I'll give you an example. West End Quads. There are 64 beds in West End Quads. 400 people preference it as their first preference. There's no possible way for us to, unless we had 400 beds in those quads, to be able to accommodate that type of demand. And so it becomes more of a supply and demand issue than necessarily a pleasing everybody issue. And we are pretty proud of 83%. This is the second year that we've done the system this way. We used to do more of a lottery-based system where you had a 15-minute window to select what you wanted, and it was much more stressful, and it was and we feel like it took more time from students and it caused more issues, and we had heard a lot more complaints from students than we have with this system. So we're pretty happy with 83%. Would I like to be able to please everybody? Yes. Do I have the inventory that will allow me to do that? No.
Yeah. Question about the Potomac House. You brought that up. Why is it a sophomore point?
Sure. Potomac House will be open for its 3rd year next year. And the first year that we opened Potomac House was a first-year building. And we had over 1,700 people preference it as their first preference the first year. The building has 370 beds. And so the question that we ask ourselves is, in looking at the type of 4-year system we were trying to create, where you move up in housing from year to year, how do you move up from a brand new building your first year to your second year to an 80-year-old building? Okay, and so the issue became, at the time, Crawford and Madison were second-year properties. We essentially swapped Crawford and Madison for Potomac House, because Crawford and Madison also don't have kitchens, and neither does Potomac House. So we said, for rising second-year students, let's give them a brand new building, even though it doesn't have kitchens, instead of Crawford and Madison, which are older buildings. We made that decision. We talked with RHA. And that is what we did, and why we changed that. Now, does that mean that in the future we won't necessarily change that back? I have no idea at this point. You know, we are listening to what students are saying, and we know that they want kitchens, but we don't have buildings that have them in order to accommodate that population. So it becomes, do you give them a brand new building, or do you give them an older building?
Right. So when Potomac House was constructed, was it without the idea of kitchens?
It was in the plans for Potomac House. There were never kitchens involved in that building.
And were there plans that it would become a freshman dorm?
In the initial stages, it was planned as a first-year building. Right. But you know, as the institution has grown and has needed second-year beds, you ended up with essentially too many beds in terms of that meet this particular mold of what somebody on this campus thinks of a first-year building. Mm-hmm. You know, not everybody's going to have a kitchen their second year. Not everybody's going to have a kitchen their third year. Most students do, but not everybody's going to get one.
Sure. Another kind of gear here is, what is the rationale behind UPD sort of checking in the dorms so frequently? And is there any sort of compelling reason besides the normal safety precautions that they come around about once every hour on each floor, even in just very small dorms like Lafayette or Fulbright?
My understanding is that and you would need to talk with UPD about this, but my understanding is that their process and procedure is they check buildings X number of times per shift, and so if it's an 8-hour shift, they're responsible for checking it X number of times. It's also possible that they check first-year buildings more often than they check other buildings, and it's simply a safety and security issue.
Okay. And finally, what is the stance of housing programs for the issue of co-ed rooms?
You know, it's simply something that comes up occasionally, and when it comes up, we look at all the issues, look at what other schools are doing, and see if it will work on this campus. We currently do have gender-neutral housing in our Scholars Village. We've had that for 8 years. So if somebody wants to apply as a living and learning cohort and gets assigned to the Scholars Village, they do have that gender-neutral option. And so that is where we have addressed that issue for the past number of years.
Great. Well, that's all the questions I have. So thank you very much for
taking the
time to interview me and answer these for the students.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.